So just to follow up on Senator Lanhelm's questions there, in the meetings that you had with the Federal Police and ASIO, were matters related to sponsored passes and escorted passes, the A and B, in other words, on your information circular, were they matters that had been discussed?
There were a series of meetings, Senator Milne, that went over a period of weeks, and then on top of that, the implementation of the Security Task Force. These matters, and ASIO and AFP were present at, I think, virtually all of those meetings. These matters have come up in general context, and different subgroups of the task force are attending to aspects, particularly involving the DPS in relation to passes. So, okay. Yes, the matter has been raised, but I can't specifically say where and when, and as you would appreciate, I won't be going into the detail of the matters discussed at those meetings.
I just wanted to establish that in the draft advice that you would have received, and on the back of the Federal Police and ASIO, the issue of the passes in both categories had been raised previously, as you've just said. Was the issue of facial coverings ever raised by the Federal Police or ASIO?
Well, I think it's probably appropriate that I don't comment on the details of those conversations and those briefings, majority of which occurred in the secure briefing room, so that in itself would indicate that these matters shouldn't be discussed outside of that area. But in general, in the task force meetings, all matters of security are considered and have been considered.
What I'm trying to establish here is, from the evidence that the Black Rod has given, the meeting that occurred at some time after 10 o'clock on the 2nd of October, in the draft that was provided to you, there was no reference to covering of faces or face coverings, and that the presiding officers made that decision. Given that if that had been something that had been part of the discussions and so on, you'd assume it would have been brought forward as part of the draft. So I'm asking you, had you had any discussions with the Speaker of the House of Representatives prior to coming to this meeting in the Speaker's office on sometime after 10 o'clock on the 2nd? Had you had any discussion with the Speaker prior to that meeting with regard to the issue of facial coverings?
I've had many discussions with the Speaker in relation to all security matters, and that would include facial coverings.
So you had had a discussion with the Speaker prior to that meeting on facial coverings?
Yes.
And what was the nature of those discussions?
I'm not going to discuss the nature of the discussions that I've had with the Speaker in relation to those matters.
So in the meeting that you had on that morning where point C was added, was it your idea to add that, or was it the Speaker's idea to add that?
Senator Milne, in relation to that entire circular, it is the responsibility of both presiding officers to sign off on every point, including the third point, and that was discussed at that meeting. And that's as far as I wish to take the matter in relation to the discussions concerning that particular security circular that was issued that day.
So let me put it another way. Had you and the Speaker made a decision to ban facial coverings prior to going to that meeting in the Speaker's office at which all the other people were present?
The answer clearly to that is no.
Okay, you hadn't made that decision beforehand. Can you tell me whether you had had any correspondence or contact with anyone from the Prime Minister's office prior to that meeting in the Speaker's office with regard to the issue of facial covering?
No, I had not.
Did you have any contact or with any other minister or ministerial office prior to that meeting?
No, I had not.
So since you had had no contact from the Prime Minister's office, do you know if the Speaker had had discussions with the Prime Minister's office?
Well, that's a matter for the Speaker, but can I just indicate this? The Speaker and I, with the Prime Minister's office and the Attorney-General's Department, the Prime Minister and Cabinet, ASIO and AFP have determined that all initial communication concerning security will be directed to the Speaker's office, which makes perfect sense. The Speaker is the chair of the task force. rather than having both presiding officers constantly being informed of the same thing, it goes to one particular office, and then the senior staff of both offices communicate regularly on those matters. So all original communication would go to the Speaker's office.
Okay, so on that basis, if a decision on banning facial coverings was under active consideration in the Speaker's office, and you said that that was by way of, that matters would come by way of communication, did I hear you just say, to your senior staff?
That's right. If we need to meet, our two senior staff members would communicate and we would meet. And the Speaker and I meet on an ad hoc basis. We have done more so probably in the last few months due to security arrangements than other matters. But we meet on an ad hoc basis and our staff are in constant contact in relation to these matters, or indeed the Speaker and I would talk if we need to.
So in relation to the Speaker and yourself discussing the issue of facial coverings, over what period of time have you been discussing that?
Well, Senator, it's in the mix of everything, and it's not a focal point. In fact, it would be a very small aspect of our overall discussions, and that would have occurred over a number of weeks.
So since it was a small part of your discussions, and since you as the presiding officers made the decision to add the issue of the facial coverings on that day, what changed for you and the Speaker such that you then, without the advice of your security committee, or whatever it is, without the recommendation rather of the security committee, what changed such that you and the Speaker arrived at that decision and clearly put it to the meeting?
Well, we were clearly of the view, based upon the advice that had been received, that a disruption was going to occur in Parliament House that day. And the advice included that the fact it would be a group of people, I think the figure of 10 was used, and some of them may be male, wearing concealing garments, and the best and the most immediate response was to enable us to ensure the identity of those people in the public gallery. Now, I think that was a prudent decision for that particular day. And let's bear in mind, that was the last sitting day of a session. It was an interim measure, and it was going to impact on Parliament House for one day. And that's exactly what that decision, in effect, did. The Speaker and I have since met yesterday to revise that interim decision, which we've done, and that's become public this morning.
So why would you change the whole arrangements when you had clearly been given advice that there may be a disruption in one of the galleries on that day? Why didn't you just take some anticipatory action in terms of security in the gallery on that day rather than change the rules in the way that you have now made permanent changes to the rules in terms of passes? Why would you make a permanent change to the rules when you anticipated there was going to be a disruption in one place on one day?
Well, the nature of the information received indicated it was going to be people who had their faces covered. And so that was the interim immediate arrangement that we made, never intending it to be permanent, so we could then seek further advice, further information, and come up with what we now have as a second interim position. And we'll still seek further advice, and that the current interim arrangements may or may not continue. It will depend on what happens over the next short period.
This really doesn't make sense to me, in the sense that the ban on the passes, therefore, was that only for that day as well? An
interim decision, and we've continued that interim decision. That interim decision lasted until 8:30 this morning, and now we have a further set of measures that are in effect until such time as any other changes are made. In relation to security, Senator Milne, it's a fluid beast. Security changes rapidly, and we have to be responsive.
But wouldn't you, I mean, the issue of the passes, there is a rationale for it. It was made on the basis of advice from the committee put to you as part of that debate with the presiding officers. This third point was something that you and the Speaker determined yourselves.
Well, as we did the first 2 points, I mean, We weren't completely devoid of any involvement in the first 2 points. All 3 points were agreed to and discussed and debated by the Speaker and I as well as others.
Okay, so did you seek advice from anyone in that particular meeting on the morning of the 2nd as to the efficacy of introducing such an interim measure with regard to facial covering? Did you seek advice from anyone expert in security at all?
Well, advice, as I indicated earlier, has been oncoming on a regular basis. This particular measure occurred, and the meeting occurred just after noon. Question time was commencing at 2. I think you could appreciate there was a degree of urgency in coming up with a temporary measure, which we did.
Yes, but I'm asking who with any sort of expertise in security imagined that this was a good idea?
Well, we had people from the Department of Parliamentary Services who have part of their title and their roles are security management of the building.
Yes, but we've already established that they don't have any expertise in security as such.
That was only in relation to the black rod and the sergeant.
So who advised that this action on facial coverings was the appropriate way to deal with a anticipated disruption in one of the galleries?
Well, as I indicated earlier, Senator Milne, I'm not going to go into the detail of the discussion or the advice provided.
But we've not been able to establish there was any advice at this point other than you and the Speaker reaching this decision, and that the Speaker has predominant responsibility and that's passed on to you. I haven't heard any clarity here as to any advice other than from the Speaker.
Well, advice was given to us and we've acted upon that advice and that discussion in that meeting.
Well, that's as far as I can go.
Senator Milne, just